So a few days ago I released a video titled Advice on Drawing Realistic Images, where I talked about my approach when it comes to drawing from photographs and creating a realistic drawing. In that video I talked briefly about how I have a different approach when I draw from imagination and when there isn't a reference image to work from. So for this one I'm going to go more in depth and discuss my approach when I draw from imagination. I'm also going to do some drawing and I can give some advice that might be useful. So drawing from imagination is something that a lot of people strive towards, because to draw from imagination means you are creating something original, something that didn't exist before, which came from you, and there's something very special about that because only you could do it. It's a combination of the ideas in your head and your ability to realise those ideas and present them to others. When other people see this work, they'll be looking at something they haven't seen before, and artwork which comes from an artist's imagination can also say a lot about the artist themselves. Now the purpose of this video isn't to talk about why drawing from the imagination is good, because we all probably know that already, but I actually want to talk about my approach when I draw from the imagination and pass on some advice that I think might be useful. To give a bit of context, I've been drawing for a while and I never used to draw from imagination. Instead, I just used to draw from photographs. I'd always draw things that I was interested in, like characters out of films or TV shows, all of that stuff that you see quite often these days. And my focus was on drawing all of that stuff as well as I could, and so naturally I improved at the stuff that's involved in realistic drawing. Check out the last video to get an idea of what I'm talking about. But anyways, as I got a bit older, I started to become a bit bored with it. And it's not that I didn't like it, because I still enjoy doing that kind of drawing, it's that I was pretty comfortable working in that way. And so I wasn't really challenging myself, and so to cut a long story short, I started to learn other aspects, and eventually I started this YouTube channel in the process, and I made all of these videos on all of the stuff that I had learned from doing the realistic drawing, but on the side I was also trying to improve at other areas of drawing. And just a quick side note, that's kind of how I approach the content on this channel and the instructional videos. I want to learn myself and then pass on the stuff that I learn and things that have helped me, because they might help you. And so the more that I learn, the more useful content that I can create, such as videos on drawing from the imagination. And I'm no expert at this, it's something that I've been practicing for a while, and there is stuff that I think I can pass on to you that might be helpful. So I was drawing the image on screen without using any reference images. Instead, I was improvising and drawing as I went. Now there's a few things that I required, such as the fundamentals. A big one is having an understanding of perspective, and it's what plays an important part in most of these drawings that I create, especially for the environments and the architectural work. But let's just take a look at that initial outline that I created before I started rendering and adding details to this drawing. So you can see that all of this is pretty simple. Here we have the horizon line, which I created first before finding a vanishing point. Now I've done an introductory tutorial on perspective, so if you want to go watch that, that might help you out if you're not too familiar with perspective. But then I went ahead and started to draw some converging outlines using a ruler, and I started to draw in some basic shapes, and this is really simple to do, and these shapes have the potential to be anything, and in fact anything can be broken down into basic shapes. There's a lot of videos out there discussing basic forms and how you can use them to draw all kinds of things in perspective. So going back to the drawing, you can see how I start to build on top of these rough outlines with details and textures. I found myself starting from one point and working forward, similar to how I draw from a photograph. When drawing like this, I actually use the eraser quite a lot, because I'm always testing things out by drawing them in first, and if they don't look good then I just erase them and replace them with something else. I don't really have this exact plan for what I'm going to draw in every part of the drawing, but usually I have just an overall idea in my head of what I want the scene to look like. I know that some of you commented on one of the previous videos which I did, where I did a drawing that was similar to this one, and a lot of you was asking, you know, how do I get all of these structures structures and the ideas for all these mechanical parts which come together. And in all honesty, I just improvise and create shapes and maybe go ahead and take all kinds of different elements from different places and things that I've seen, just things that I've been inspired and influenced by. All of that comes together and creates an image like this. But in terms of the subject that you want to draw, it's useful to know and have an understanding of a few things, like the fundamentals again. For instance, when I draw people and figures from the imagination, I think that's really difficult because I don't have the best understanding of anatomy, so maybe I need to practice that a bit more so that I can start involving that into my work. Perspective, I'm quite confident with. I do a lot of buildings and drawings of environments, so that's something that I've been practicing for a while, and it's always involved in most of the drawings that I create. But I do think I need to start improving my understanding of anatomy a bit more, because I think that if you have a good understanding of how perspective works, and then you have some knowledge of some anatomy and the proportions of the figure, then you can pretty much bring them together and draw anything. And a good example of this is artists like Kim Jung-gi. He's a master at drawing from imagination. He can confidently draw anything in pen, starting from one point, and his understanding of perspective and anatomy is clearly displayed in his work. But it's not just that which stands out, I think it's also the subjects which he draws. You see, to be able to draw from imagination, you need to be able to visualize what you are drawing. And in some sense, you need to know what you are drawing in terms of its form, appearance, and sometimes even the function of the object you are drawing. And we can probably all imagine something like our mobile phones from all different angles, and that's because we are familiar with them. We look at them every day, and so our understanding of its form and how it appears is stored into our head in some way. And so if you wanted to go ahead and draw that, you would probably be able to have a good picture in your head and visualize what you want to draw, and then it would just be down to you having the ability to go ahead and then draw it. But now imagine if someone asked you to draw a military jeep or a tank with all its details and features. These are like the things that appear in Kim Jung-gi's work quite a bit. And I'm not saying that he owns a tank or anything, even though that would be pretty cool, but he does have a good understanding of them, and so that's probably why he can draw them with a lot of confidence, because he's able to understand what he is drawing. And for him to be able to draw the image in full detail right away from the start, he is probably visualizing the basic shape of a tank, but also considering the perspective as he draws it in completely. And he is able to do that with all kinds of things. Now, I don't even think I've mentioned it yet, but it's something that is referred to as our visual library. And this is essentially anything that you are familiar with and that you can visualize in your head before drawing it. So how do we improve our visual library? Or should I say increase, because that's what we are essentially doing anytime we look and study something. And yeah, that's the best way to do it, is to look and study something. If you draw what you are studying using a reference image on various angles, you will naturally become familiar with it. And with practice, you'll be able to recall upon that process and what you have just stored in the visual library to then draw it from imagination. I hope that makes sense, but anyways, that's why I also think that drawing from photos or from life, which is probably one of the most beneficial things, is a good place to start. You'll collect a lot of information, and I believe that from drawing something, you naturally study and gain an understanding of the subject you are drawing. Also, it's good to maybe get an idea of how whatever it is you are drawing functions. If it's a vehicle, try and learn a bit about the vehicle, and then you can figure it out and then apply it to other things. For instance, if you have a good understanding of how an engine appears in a car, and that's just an example, but that information would be valuable when it comes to drawing something like a vehicle, and you can even manipulate that information, and instead of drawing the engine how it would normally appear, instead you can make changes, alterations, and come up with some really creative things that you can involve in other areas of the drawing. So yeah, next time you are walking down the street or something, just have a look at a vehicle or a car and pay attention to the small details, how it looks, the tires, anything really, and just try and store that information and familiarize yourself with it so that you can call upon it later again when it comes to drawing and you have no reference images to work from. I mean, nowadays you can easily get access to all kinds of different reference images online, so it's not that essential, but again, if you want to draw purely from your imagination, it's good to have this understanding of the object, like its basic form. For instance, it's a lot easier to draw some basic shapes in perspective, just to get the overall form of the object you are drawing first, and then build on top of that with the details and everything else. But with all of the reference images out there online, you can actually just study anything just by googling something and then drawing it from different angles, and then try and put them reference images aside and try drawing the subject without looking at the reference images. And so that's a good way to increase your visual library. But anyways, this drawing on screen is actually for an architectural project, so I'm kind of restricted to what I can draw. There is already this theme which has been established for this drawing, and this is just a simple scene in 1-point perspective. My drawings from imagination are quite detailed, and normally when things are in the distance they lose detail or it becomes simplified, but with this, and for the style that I'm going for, I just create a display of intricate line work and add some shading when necessary with the pencil. And yeah, it's quite an overwhelming display of line work and details, but that is something that I kind of like visually. I think it's quite effective. But anyways, that's pretty much everything for this video. If you have any questions, then feel free to ask below, and if you enjoyed this, then please give it a like. I'm working on some step-by-step tutorials, so be sure to subscribe to stay up to date. Also, real-time footage for this drawing and a lot of the other drawings that I do is available on the Patreon page. The link is in the description. Thank you for watching, and of course, I'll see you in the next one.